One thing that fascinates me about becoming a Christian and having my life turned upside down in a positive way is how I can look back and see this really neat line of events that happened in my life that led me to this path. One thing that always amazed me was my continual fascination with history. Why did I read so much history? Why was I so interested in history? No one in my family was interested in history. My father was a history major, actually, in college. You would think he would be very interested in history, but he had no interest in our family history before the family arrived in the United States. So his interest in family history went back to his grandfather, and that was it. And then there's sort of this vague collection of tales of what happened before, but certainly no connection with any kind of history. History for him was kind of like the way people study baseball or the way people study movies. It was something interesting, but there was no connection there. It's a spectator kind of sport. He certainly didn't see history as a continuation leading to the present. So when you're raised Lutheran, as I was, you believe that everything started with Martin Luther, that before Martin Luther there was chaos, and there's no sense in really studying anything about it. And then you can see movies about ancient Rome or ancient Egypt, and that's interesting, but the line from ancient Rome or from ancient Egypt to today is completely broken and shattered. It's like studying someone from Mars, it's you have this vague idea that there's something there, but it has nothing to do with you. You're completely separated from that. Well, for some reason I kept reading history and I was really interested in it. And then when I became a Christian, everything started to connect together. So one thing that always bothered me when I was a kid, when I was growing up, is reading about the persecutions of the early Christians. Okay, why did these people die? Because I was taught that Christianity in my Lutheran church was this sort of vague kind of coming together. It's sort of social. And there really is no sin. There really is nothing holy. You just kind of come together and God just sort of gives us eternal life. So why would someone suffer for that? Why would someone defend that kind of vague sort of notion? So I knew that there was something taught to the early Christians that the Lutherans did not teach. Okay? And then I started to read things like Pliny the Younger, when he was governor of Syria, wrote a letter to the emperor because everybody where he lived had stopped worshiping, had stopped going to these pagan temples. And it just so happened that at the same time period, all the oracles had ceased to function. So the oracles were these places where you would go to ask advice, and this Sibyl, this woman, would go into this trance and utter these unintelligible things, and the priest would interpret what she uttered and give you an answer. And the weird thing is these answers really fit and really helped people, or else these places wouldn't have been famous. That our ancestors weren't completely stupid. There really was something to these places, and suddenly it all stopped around the time of Christ's life. And it's recorded, and they debated about this, and it was of concern. The god Pan actually died. And there were rumors going around that these pagan gods were dying, and this was of great concern to the people at the time. So these people in Syria had stopped going to these pagan temples, these rituals that had been followed faithfully for thousands of years, and they just stopped. because of these Christians, this sect. So what was it that they were learning? It really drove me towards the church without really realizing it, towards the Catholic Church. Another thing that fascinated me was Bishop Polycarp of Smyrna went to Rome. Now, for a long time, I thought he went to talk to Pope Clement. I don't know if I was taught that by the Jesuits at my college, or it was just my own mistake, because it was actually a later pope that Polycarp went to go talk to. But the reason why he went was because the Eastern churches, Polycarp was a bishop in Smyrna, which is in present-day Turkey. So Anatolia is the ancient name for that. And that was a very, very Greek area, Greek-speaking area. Polycarp knew the apostles. The apostles appointed Polycarp to his position. The apostles also appointed Pope Clement. They knew Pope Clement, although Polycarp went to talk to a later pope. Polycarp and Pope Clement were both alive around the year 100. So, around the year 100, within the lifetime of the people who knew the apostles intimately, you have the episcopacy, you have the priests, you have the bishops, you have deacons, because Pliny the Younger, in his letter to the emperor, writes about this deaconess that he tortured to find out what was being taught by this new religion, and it was nothing but a bunch of ridiculous superstition, he told the emperor. But he mentioned a deacon, and it's interesting because the priests and deacons and bishops were present at the time the people who knew the apostles intimately were still alive. Now, these churches are not going to succeed. They're not going to go anywhere. People are not going to abandon all these rituals that they followed for thousands of years unless there's something really amazing that's changing their lives. And that's what really got into me like a hook, like a hooked fish. And that's what, I can just see it leading me to the Catholic Church. The other thing is this idea that holiness was just arbitrary thing. Okay, now, I tried to find my books, but I'm living here in the Philippines, and my library is all packed up in boxes. It's going to be a few years before I get everything unpacked and organized, but I read somewhere, the history of holiness. That holiness was an idea invented by the Persians. Maybe this is wrong, but I'm going to record this anyway, just so my son later on, if something happens to me, he'll know what his father would have taught him. This is what I would teach my son. That I'm not going to teach him that this is fact, and anybody who argues with this is an idiot. No, I'm going to teach him that this is my understanding, and try to get him curious, so he'll look into these things himself. That was one thing I admired about the Jesuits. They wanted us to think for ourselves. They didn't want us just to repeat mindlessly these arbitrary things. So, about the early church, you had the episcopacy, you had these priests, these bishops, you had this persecution. So, why? Why were these people putting up with this stuff? Well, holiness came from, I think, the ancient Persians, the Zoroastrians. And their idea, I imagine, came back from the Ice Age. Now you have to imagine the Ice Age. These people, our ancestors, barely survived this, barely. A few hundred people in scattered tribes populated what's now the earth. So in order to survive, you had to have fire. So what did fire mean to these people? Well, they're being hunted by these terrific animals, these amazing, fierce beasts that we can only imagine today. Cave bears and giant wolves and saber-toothed tigers and, lions everywhere. So fire represented warmth, from the cold. It represented light, so you could see where you're going, and it represented protection. Because with fire, you could, even a cave bear wouldn't attack you if you had, a fire. So it was security. It was warmth, physical warmth. It was light orientation, and it was, protection. So they figured out that people could be like this fire. People could have this attribute of the flame. So you could be like the flame from God. You could have that flame within you. And then, of course, we see, at Pentecost, the flame above the apostles' heads, right? Well, the flame would be that some people are like the fire. So when the people are around you, you feel warm. When the people are there, you trust them to guide you with their wisdom. And you feel safe when they're around. And this was like fire within them. They're giving you all these attributes that fire has. And that was the original idea of holiness. This was my understanding, okay? So it connects them to God. God gives you this person to help you in your life. So this person is somehow connected to a higher state, a higher level of purity than other people because they have this. They're closer to God. So they're holy. So what did this? How did they get these attributes? And boom, there's religion, okay? There's your religion. Trying to find out, because this tribe really benefited with this guy or this woman was holy, and it really helped us for a long time. We need another person like this. How did they get there? How did they do that? If we could get a lot of people that have this attribute, we're really going to do well. Okay? It's a survival thing. So in that way, you could see religion as kind of like a developing technology, because religion developed alongside, step by step, its close cousin, mathematics. Mathematics was a hidden knowledge for secret knowledge, like a Masonic kind of thing in the ancient world, advanced mathematics. So Christianity was kind of the same thing. It was this development in human, in being human, how to be a more perfect human, a better human, how to be closer to God. And once you understand that God exists, it all makes sense. And of course, my fascination with history, Bishop Polycarp went to Rome because the East was developing these separate traditions from the West, and separate dates of Easter and separate type of Eucharist. And it's really interesting. When you study these original apostolic churches, they're all still around us. You've got the Armenian churches, you've got the Coptic churches. The Coptic churches call their patriarch Pope, just like in Rome, the Catholics call their patriarch Pope. And the other patriarchs are of Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Antioch. And those are all Eastern churches. Those are all Orthodox churches. And the Coptics consider themselves Orthodox, Egyptian Orthodox. And the Armenians are very close to a Catholic, the original Catholic Church. They still have the altar rail. They still have the wafers instead of the chunks of bread floating in wine. The Armenians and the Coptics walked out of the Council of Chalcedon, and they saw that the church was kind of correcting too many things, changing too many things that the apostles taught. And so the Armenians and the Coptics remained sort of in that frozen state from the 4th century. And then the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches all continued to develop until around the time of the Crusades, when there was the Great Schism. But the interesting thing is the schism involved Constantinople and Rome, but it didn't really involve the Coptic churches in Alexandria. So it didn't really involve the Armenian churches. So they were kind of unaffected by all this. And if you talk to Copts or Armenians, they can tell you that at the time, the Armenian bishops and the Coptic bishops could foresee that all these divisions are going to take place because of all these changes the Catholics and Orthodox are having. So it's really interesting when you start studying all this. You can see this continuity. the Coptic still speak the ancient Egyptian language, which is how hieroglyphics were deciphered. It's because all these Coptic people are walking around still speaking the ancient Egyptian language. That is the ancient Egyptian people right there. They're still there. The Armenians, my goodness, that one of those Armenian churches, I think, in Armenia is one of the oldest churches in the world. It's the 2nd century, I think. The Church of Maria Maggiore in Rome has been offering the Eucharist every day since the 4th century, but I think that church in Armenia predates it. And then you've got the followers of the Apostle Thomas, who went to India, and that's a couple of million people there in India, a super ancient church. It's really interesting, and I run into so many evangelicals that have converted to either Orthodox or Catholic, and I talk to them about it, and they say, "Oh, no, we converted ourselves because we studied the church, we studied the history." Once you start reading history, once you get fascinated with history, it's only a matter of time before you get curious about the apostolic churches, the Catholic, the Orthodox, the Armenian, the Coptic. And then, of course, once you do, it's a slippery slope. Once you start studying it, your life begins to completely change. And it's very similar to my analogy, my short stories about mathematics. It's very similar to mathematics. I used to make fun of algebra all the time, trigonometry, calculus. Y plus 1, y minus 1, balancing equations. What does this have to do with life? Well, nothing. But if you want to send a spacecraft to Mars, you have to have it. So you can see it working in the real world. You can see it working with these satellites, with these launched robots. I know, the robots are probably being remote controlled from the deserts of Australia, okay? But I think it's very possible that those little rovers are indeed running around on Mars. And it's that advanced mathematics that did it. Well, holiness is the working of Christianity. That's what it is. And it works. And once you join a real apostolic church, once you start partaking of the sacraments, going to confession, fasting, once you understand what it really is, it transforms your life. It really does. And you can't go back making fun of advanced mathematics, once you understand what mathematics is, once you see the truth. It's the same with Christianity. It's really amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little talk. Take care. Have a good day.